There's no other place on this planet where education is more competitive than it is here in Asia. It has been taught to children as they're growing up that if they do well in education, they will have a set life, kind of like the mafia. You're a made man. If you get into one of the top schools, you have a career that will progress and you'll be able to, have a life of prosperity. And if you don't, well, then bad things happen. And so as a result, you have some good outcomes from the system, but also some negative outcomes, which we'll talk about. What is up, YouTube? We're back at it again. This time I am here in Singapore to talk about a very important subject, and no better place than to do it here, where it is literally the best schooling system on paper and reputation in Asia, here in Singapore. If we talk about schooling and the education system here, we have to talk about filial piety, which is what I discussed in one of my earlier videos about how that came about from China during a time of distress and chaos, and how that fixed China up, but then that culture and tradition spread to many other parts of Asia. And it is that concoction of filial piety with an institution that's very rigid in its ascension plan and time frame and hurdles that you have to hit. When you mix those two together, it's kind of like mixing filial piety and the military. You're going to get a concentration of deadlines you have to meet, a path you have to go through, and basically no questions asked. Because that's what filial piety is about: respect for the elders, respect for the system, and doing what you can to work within and not stick out. So what we have is a situation where, since we were little children, Asians, we have been told that we need to perform well. And by doing so, we can start basically the treadmill coming up the ladder to achieve more and more, which opens up more and more doorways and gateways and opportunities, and that there's this set path, and that path should never be questioned and should be followed. And basically, you're supposed to do as best as you can on that path and never deviate from it, because that is just not the way filial piety works, right? It's about obedience and respect. So that is a rigid system, an austere system that has been set up here, and that everybody follows, right? Pretty much everybody follows, because if you don't, you're an outcast in society. The reinforcement that filial piety provides for the education system creates a boiling hot pot of pressure cooker of where once you enter, there is no way out. And the only way out is actually, a drastic measure, or you do as best as you can and you perform well. What was critical was to create a measuring or metric-based system, what we call grades, in order to classify people so that they can programmatically determine who has potential and who does not have potential. And through this numbering system, and more importantly, a standardized way of numbering the system that everybody has to go through like a gauntlet of life, one will be able to determine through this system, through numbers and measurement, those who should, be given the opportunity to learn more and progress in life versus those probably shouldn't. The challenge with all this is that, as we all know, people aren't all the same, and, different people blossom at different points of their life. Like, I didn't blossom when I did a little bit as a little kid, and then I went into a dark area, and then I blossomed later in life. So it's like these cycles, right? You're not always like, blah, 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 like, blossoming all the time. But that's not taken into consideration. There's a timetable that's set, and if you don't do certain things within a certain time frame, that's a problem. And so there's a whole area of misconfiguration for people who just didn't have the right timing and blossoming period of their life to excel in the system. And those people are disadvantaged. And those who happen to be blossoming at the right time in their life, well, you want to call it luck, you want to call it coincidence, but they're a subgroup, basically, of people and not representative of potential of the entire group of people or society in general. The pressure is so immense to perform well that there's a shadow education system that has emerged in the past few decades. And even as a kid, when I was growing up in Korea, I remember my friends who were living in Korea. I mean, look, after school is over, you're not going home, right? Nobody goes home, right? You go to the after school, basically, which is where you have private tutoring lessons or tutoring lessons in smaller classes to help you basically get one up over your other students so that you can outperform them when you do the graded test. This shadow education system has morphed into something quite crazy more recently. We have things such as celebrity tutors in Korea and in Hong Kong and China. And, these people, these celebrity tutors, I mean, they make millions of dollars, right? And they pander techniques and ways to learn and knowledge and shortcuts. And basically, it's all these like secret tips and tricks to won over the rest of your classmates in order for you to get above because of the competition. And these people are like celebrities. In fact, there's even a Netflix series dedicated to celebrity tutors. And it's basically the BTS of celebrity tutor and the shadow education system. I mean, if you take a step back, it's quite crazy that such a thing even exists and that the word celebrity and tutor are actually put together. But that should give you an indication to the extent of which people have been pushed forward to through pressure and through competition to actually create such a thing, right? Such a phenomenon. Think about it. Like, it wouldn't exist unless there was a huge demand for it. And what spurred on this demand? Well, it's just as I just said, this intense amount of competition where your life depends basically on how well you do in school. And that is the single determinant of your future as a human being. Now, I've got two kids. I've got a 5-year-old son who's turning 6 now and a 1.5-year-old daughter. And for our son, when, he was born and we were thinking about putting him to school, we started hearing that, hey, you got to put him to school before like around 2 or even earlier. He's got to go to pre-kindergarten school, preschool or preschool. And I was actually kind of shocked, because I went to basically kindergarten. That was the start, right? At 5 years old, I went to kindergarten and then started first grade when I was 6. And that was it, right? There was no pre-kindergarten and there was definitely no pre-kindergarten. And so when I started hearing this as a parent from other parents, there's this whole parent competition going on as well, not just the kids, right? And there was like pressure, like, hey, if you don't send your son to school pre-K at 2 years old, he's gonna miss out, right? He's not gonna learn as quick, and he's gonna stumble, and you're setting him back. And I just didn't buy it. I was like, what's a 2-year-old going to learn, right? I did and eventually send him to preschool because I did think just socializing with other little babies made sense, right? Getting used to other babies and knowing how to interact, sharing is caring from a young age, that kind of stuff. Totally into. But it's not like education in the sense they were learning their like ABCs like when they were 4 years old, which is actually what started to happen and was a concern for me and the pressure my son had when he was forced to do that. So, the rat race, or what you want to call the treadmill, starts earlier and earlier in life. And again, what is spurning this is because of the competition, right? You need to like somehow get an advantage over everybody else to increase your rate of success, right? And one of them is to just start earlier, right? Just start earlier and you have a better chance of going up. So I've had the privilege of, visiting many countries in Asia. And seeing how my friends kind of, study and deal with this pressure, right? And it's actually a little different from country to country in Asia. Even within the Filial Piety Confucianist influenced sphere, there are differences. For example, I would say like in Korea, there's more of a compression into the university entry exams, right? Like it's been compressed into that point in your life, which will determine whether or not you're basically going to make it or not. Whereas I would say like in a country like here in Singapore, it's a little bit less compressed into that singular exam that determines your entire life and more pulled out into earlier and earlier stages. So, for example, there's such a thing here in Singapore called the PSLEs, which is basically what the test you take when you leave primary school to determine where you go for your secondary school. And, that's like this huge test here. Like both parents and kids get very stressed out studying for this thing because it starts to do the branch in the forks, the branch in the road, the fork in the road of where you're going to end up, right? And it's like one of the first main ones. So like, oh, there's a lot of studying for your PSLEs, a parent, some parents take days off and so on and so forth. So you don't see that type of pressure, I would say, in like a country in like Korea or Japan or something like that, where at that young an age. So yeah, it's more pulled out here. It starts earlier, but that's actually less traumatic when you compress everything into a single exam, which is kind of what happens, for example, in Korea and Japan. Like in Korea, there's the college entrance exams called the Sunung, and the Sunung is like, that's it, right? You do well there, you're a made man like the mafia. You don't do well, and that's it, right? If you don't do well, you won't be able to get a good job. That means you won't be able to make money. That means you won't be able to buy a house. That means you won't be able to get married because no one's going to want to marry you if you can't make money and buy a house. And that means you're basically going to be an outcast or, have some kind of common degenerate type of person in society, doing odd jobs, right? And that's it. That's it. That's kind of it. And that's what people believe in. And it's quite sad, actually, when you think about it that way, because it's just a singular exam and it's so important. It's not just the students, like everybody understands this, right? So there are companies that actually stay open later than normal to reduce the amount of traffic so students can get to, where they need to get to and there's not congestion. There's even like situations where, some airlines and airplanes have actually been delayed and or just no flights, right? No flights, literally. Airplanes so as to not roughen the waters during the sanong for the students to take their exam. And the parents come out and, the parents are like waiting at the school premise, like, outside, they're all anxious as well. Of course, you want your children to succeed. So, it's this huge thing, right? That your life essentially boils down to at that moment in time. And, when you compress pressure like that, bad things happen. And it's no surprise that there's a lot of suicides in Korea because of this, and also in Japan, as a result of compressing all the pressure into this and making it a binary moment in your life into whether or not you're going to succeed or not. And, as an older man now, having had a career and whatnot, obviously it's not boiled down to an exam. I mean, my entire life is the reverse of that, right? And you can succeed and do great things. That has nothing to do with an exam. It is a sad thing, some of the negative outcomes. I mean, even in countries like here in Singapore, where I said it's kind of more stretched out and not compressed in a single point and a single exam, it's still a problem with regards to bad outcomes, right? I think the number one cause of death for children between 15 and 29 years old is suicides. That's like the number one cause of death, right? Think about that. It's kind of sad, actually, when you think about it. And that's underreported. So it's kind of like miscarriages. Like nobody really wants to report these types of statistics because it's just not good and people don't want to talk about it. It doesn't look good for anybody. But these are facts. And the thing about this is I remember when I was in Palo Alto or Mountain View out in Silicon Valley when I was doing my startups, I remember reading headlines in the local newspapers about students like committing suicide by jumping on the rail tracks. That was the way they would do it there. And, I mean, I was just shocked. I was like, wow, out here in Silicon Valley. And then, yeah, it was a problem, underreported as well. But then when I dug into the data and looked at who, were committing suicides, it was the Asian people who came to Silicon Valley, well-to-do parents, intelligent, smart. That's why they're in Silicon Valley. But their children, immense pressure as well. That they carried over that culture and tradition from their homeland and brought it over there, and they just couldn't deal and live up to the pressure, so they would, unfortunately, commit suicide as well out there. So the last thing I want to say is that, this model is an outdated model and it needs to change. And the education systems in Asia need to get on with times. Firstly, it needs to adapt to what's happening with technology, namely machine intelligence. What you're studying, you see, what you're studying and what they've created in a way to measure how intelligent you are and your potential through grades and basically a systematic type of testing system, it involves rote memory recall, and it involves analysis and analytics, right? And these things are being commoditized quicker than we believe through machine intelligence. Memory is already gone, right? Like you just query the internet, and now you even have direct access to internet. Soon you're going to have like biological interfaces into the internet, so you actually just think the query and you get your answer back through thoughts even. That's coming. And then the whole point of analytics and analyzing and math, these things have already been taken over. We have generative AI, we have ChatGPT. These things are only going to get better, right? And so just like a computer game, nobody can beat in Go or in chess the computer system, because when you give it a rule set, it will outcalculate any human. Just like in the industrial age and industrial revolution, you get a heavy weight, a hydraulic pump is going to outlift any human. And that's the same thing with these types of analytics and intelligence that we're teaching students in school and grading them in a standardized way. It's not going to be an important capability in the future. Yet the whole system is geared towards that still to this day and hasn't adapted to what is changing underneath. That means the schooling and education system needs to adapt. And if you don't adapt, you're going to get left behind. So I just want to say to anybody out here who's watching this, who is in the middle of studying in the existing schooling system, to keep an open mind, to understand that there's more to life than just school and how well you do in school. I've shown with my career and my experience that that is indeed the case. And to keep an open mind. And I'll see you in the next episode. Peace.